Today is our JSGP Commencement Lecture 2025, and we have a very distinguished guest with us. He needs no introduction, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal. But to introduce him, and before that, I would first request our Vice Chancellor, Professor C. Rajkumar, to give the welcome address.
All right, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to extend my heartiest congratulations to the incoming batch of 2024 of the students of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, both the undergraduate students as well as the master's students and also the doctoral students who have joined the JSGP. I want to begin by saying that it's an absolute delight for us to have Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, the member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and Secretary to the Government of India. I remember very vividly that we made a few attempts to get him to campus when he was Chief Economic Advisor, but given the extraordinary responsibilities that come with that job, he couldn't make it. But I'm so happy that he's here with us, and there are very few people who have such interdisciplinary approach towards not just the study of economics, but also the practice of policy, and he's one such person. So it's so appropriate that we have him with us to deliver the commencement lecture. I also want to congratulate the Dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, Professor Sudarshan, the faculty members of JSGP, and also all students who are present here for the journey that the school and indeed the university has traveled. What I thought I will do is I'm not going to speak about economics, but I just want to briefly introduce the university to all the students who are present here. Just think about for a moment the students who are present here. A decade ago, especially the undergraduate students, a decade ago, if somebody had told you that 10 years later, you will come and study at a university located in a place called Sonipat in Jagdishpur village in the state of Haryana, how many of you would have believed it? Raise your hand. Probably most of you would not have. And that's exactly what has happened to Sonipat and Haryana and possibly India. In a way, the idea of this university was part of a larger effort to create a new imagination for higher education in India. Almost very way back when I was a student at Oxford in 1998, I had an idea, the dream of building a university in India, spend the next decade as a student at Harvard, as a lawyer in New York, and as an academic in Hong Kong and Japan. And during all those years, got to write a paper entitled Establishing India's First Global University, got to meet with an Indian benefactor by name Naveen Jindal in the year 2006, spent 1 year persuading Mr. Jindal to do three things. One, to make a substantial financial commitment. Second, to do it in a not-for-profit manner. And third, to let me have the academic freedom, autonomy, and independence to build a world-class university in India. He agreed to all of it in late 2007. I moved to India in early 2008. And January to April 2008, I was trying to understand India myself as I was returning to India after a decade of living and studying abroad. And then we began the process of institution building from scratch, land acquisition, formulation of curriculum, course structure, program development, faculty recruitment plan, student admissions process, hiring of architects, construction engineers, contractors, and persuading the government of Haryana to pass a new law to establish the first private university in the state of Haryana. As late as 27th January 2009, the law was passed, and immediately I was appointed as the first Vice Chancellor of the university, and we began the process of institution building, literally recruitment of faculty, admission of students, and construction of campus. In a span of less than 6 months, we built over 100,000 square feet of built-up space, and we essentially admitted the first batch of students, set up the first school, and welcomed those first batch of students, around 100 of them, on 30th September 2009. 10 faculty members, almost all of them from India, and 20 administrative staff. And that was a very modest beginning that began here in this place. 15 years later, today we are celebrating our 15th anniversary. We are now a community of 13,000 plus students from over 105 countries, 1,200 full-time faculty members from 51 countries, and 2,800 plus administrative staff and faculty, staff, and students come from across India. this extraordinary journey and evolution of our university from what began in a very modest manner to what it has become has been possible because of three things. First, the philanthropy of our benefactor. Second, the deep commitment of our faculty and staff. And of course, the trust and faith that the students have had on our institution from the very beginning. So I just want to conclude by saying that as students who are in the public policy school, please remember that you are part of a larger community where there are 11 more schools: the law school, the business school, the School of International Affairs, the School of Liberal Arts and Humanities, the School of Journalism and Communication, the School of Art and Architecture, the School of Banking and Finance, the School of Environment and Sustainability, the School of Psychology and Counseling, the School of Languages and Literature, and the School of Public Health and Human Development exist. And I sincerely hope that you will not only engage with students in your school, but also others across all these schools. Now, of course, in the year 2009, when we had the first school, I decided that we should develop a healthy tradition of having a commencement lecture to begin the academic year for the school. And of course, it was a good idea, relatively innocent idea. And so it began in the first year. And then second year, we had the business school. So there were 2 commencement lectures. Little did I know that after 15 years, I will have to be attending and speaking at 15 commencement lectures. And that's what I've been doing for the last 3 days. Today itself, this is my 4th commencement lecture, and my office just told me that I have another one. So, but the reason I do that is I wanted to be there to personally greet each of you as you enter the portals of this institution, to welcome you and to let you know that we are there to help you to achieve your fullest potential. This institution has been created with a view to addressing a very important challenge in India, which is to essentially promote excellence in higher education, but also to recognize that we have outstanding people as scholars, as researchers, as teachers who work in the realm of ideas. One of the things that good institutions ought to be promoting is that. The second thing, which I think is equally important, is the fact that we are an interdisciplinary institution. So as students in public policy school, you have the option and opportunity to take elective courses across all the schools and institutes of the university. So I just came to know from our Dean of the Office of Academic Planning, Coordination and Interdisciplinarity that we offer every day 500 plus electives after 3 p.m. every day till around 10 or so that students, regardless of whichever school or program that you belong to, you have the opportunity to take electives across all schools. This is a rare opportunity. Even the best of the institutions, for a number of reasons, cannot give the opportunity to promote interdisciplinarity in this manner, and I sincerely hope you will make the best use of it. I also hope that you will recognize the fact that you are in a residential campus. You have a number of student-run societies, opportunities to be part of music and theatre and drama and other such initiatives that the university promotes. You can also be part of sports and extracurricular activities. The campus is a vibrant space. In some ways, I want to challenge you to go beyond the boundaries of what a typical educational environment provides for most people. Being part of this campus means that you can enjoy all those privileges. I also hope that you meet and interact with people who are not like you, who may not share your views, who may not come from the same town or state or city or country that you belong to. And that's also part of the learning opportunity that you end up having here. So with those words, I once again want to extend my heartiest congratulations and greetings to all of you. It's a very special moment as we welcome each one of you to the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy and OP Jindal Global University. I am so delighted that we have with us Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal, who will be delivering the commencement lecture on the theme Rethinking Economics Based on Complexity Theory. I hope you will make it as accessible to the first years who are present there, undergrads, as much to the postgraduates and the faculty members here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I now invite our Dean to give us a brief introduction about JSGP.
Thank you very much. So welcome to all of you, the new joinees of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. The fact that such a school exists is a tribute to the imagination and vision of Dr. C. Rajkumar, the Vice Chancellor, because public policy as a field of study or a school of government and public policy in a university didn't exist before it started in this university. We've always had some programs in public administration, and this has been there in the presidency universities established by the British, and they were established to help people understand how government works, what are the implementation mechanisms at different levels, who should be doing what, and that's public administration. It did not concern itself with how do you formulate policy and how do you get the necessary data and evidence to decide on what policies to pick, what are the evaluate policy options. None of that is part of public administration. Public administration was on the implementation side. So to start a school that is focused on both, I mean, right now I would say that the distinction between public policy and public administration is a distinction without a difference, because you can't actually formulate policy without also thinking about how you're going to get the policy implemented. Very often in India, people say, oh, policies are very good. Why do you say policies are very good? Oh, because it's formulated by very intelligent people in government. They are senior IAS officers. They've had 15 years of experience on the field. They know the works. And if they formulate a policy, then by definition, it must be good, right? And then, then when the policy doesn't work, the blame is laid on the doorstep of somebody at the lower level who's supposed to be implementing the policy, and they are messing it up. But the top ones, have got it right, and the lower ones are messing it up. And so there's a kind of a, inherently a casteist statement here in terms of hierarchy, that the lower orders in the government don't understand, are not terribly bright, and the ones who've made policy in the state capitals are very smart and bright. Now again, that's a problem, right? I mean, it's, there's no point in calling a policy good unless it achieves its objectives and goals. And so the statement that our policies are good, but the implementation is bad is nonsense. And so to embark on a school of public policy at a time when public policy was considered to be a monopoly of those already in government. And this is the British legacy. The British civil service has a permanent civil service, and many of you may have watched Yes Prime Minister and Yes Minister, which demonstrate fairly accurately the interaction that goes on between the so-called political master and the bureaucracy and the senior civil servants. That's not an inaccurate picture, it's very funny. But that's been the system, and in all the Commonwealth countries, the permanent civil service has been established, right? And so I joke that, I think, I'm not sure which college, I think Sanjeev Sanyal went to St. John's, I was in Balliol, Rajkumar was in University College, Oxford, all of us had a Rhodes Scholarship. And in Balliol College, there was a master called Benjamin Jowett. And Benjamin Jowett organized the first training programs for the members of the Indian Civil Service. They went to Balliol for some time, and they learned some Persian, some Sanskrit, something about Indian geography. They would have benefited if they could have read Sanjeev's wonderful book on the geography of India, but it wasn't there at that time. And these are young men, who were 21, and then they did this course of study. So there is a limerick in Balliol College which goes something like this. My name is Benjamin Jowett. I am the master of this college, and what I don't know isn't knowledge. Now, I think a lot of the people who joined the civil service, the ICS at the British Times, and their successors, believe that what they don't know isn't knowledge. There is an attitude that they know it all. They would have served in the Ministry of Atomic Energy for 3 years and then be transferred to rural development, and overnight they would be absolute experts on rural development, right? So this has been the inheritance. But it's not been the case in the United States. In the United States, every time a government changes at any level, local, state, or the federal government, the policy-making cadre changes with the members who are elected. And therefore, they will bring them in. And so people developed a tradition in the US, no matter what your discipline is, you could be an aeronautical engineer or you could be a physician, you would still do a degree in public policy because it was good to understand how government works and how you may be able to serve the state if you're called upon to do so at a policy-making level. And that's why all of the Ivy League colleges of the USA and other universities have very strong public policy institutions. So I'm saying all this to underline to you what an imaginative and bold move this university took in creating a school of government and public policy. And it did it at a time when there was slowly a recognition that this generalist permanent civil service making policy is not serving the best interests of the country. And governments began to realize that they need more specific domain knowledge. They need the help of think tanks, research institutions, universities. And this opens up opportunities for those who study public policy for jobs. No, there's no point in doing a course of study if you don't know where you're going to go and work. And where all of you can go and work, apart from joining government, and the government, see, Sanjeev Sanyal is an example of somebody inducted into government, inducted to beef up the economic survey was an absolutely unreadable, boring document until he came in and with a team of young people made that document readable, I mean, with graphics, with colors, and so on. It made a big difference. So government realized that, you need young people to come in, like Sanjeev, to help in crucial issues, right? So that's an opportunity for all of you who graduate from this school and university. Here is your role model in Sanjeev Sanyal. And also there are many think tanks. India is vastly underserved by think tanks. They are all concentrated in Delhi. There are a handful here and there in the states, but at the state level, there ought to be many more research think tanks where your knowledge and skills will help the concerned government analyze the data and formulate policies with some understanding of how the real world is. And CSR, India is the only country that has a law that requires corporations to give 2% of their pre-tax profit in corporate social responsibility. Unfortunately, many of them are lazy. They place that money in the Prime Minister's Relief Fund and think they've fulfilled their legal obligation. There is no social responsibility element that they undertake. But the more enlightened ones do. And what are they doing? They are doing what the state is also doing, which is to expand the supply of merit goods. Technically, economists would call them merit goods, but they're almost like public goods because the external benefits of education and health are vast. And so they would be thinking of schemes and programs for expanding education opportunities, access to education, access to health. And that's what CSR ought to be doing, and it's beginning to do that. And your knowledge and skills, whether it's in the BA Honours Economics program or in the Public Policy Master's program, is going to be in good stead. You will be able to help with these CSR initiatives. So these are the ways in which the job market is opening up, and that's why it makes sense to have a school. But when it started, right, one couldn't have assumed that all of our alumni would be as well placed as they happen to be, and indeed they are very well placed. And you should talk to some of them. We'll bring some of them over to talk to you. So that's about the school and the fact that we have economics, but you must understand that it's a very interdisciplinary program. So if you're, there is a line that I often remember in a book on cricket by C.L.R. James, I think it's called Beyond the Boundary, where he says, what do they know of cricket who only cricket know, right? So what do they know of economics who only economics know, right? That's a truism. And when I say this program is interdisciplinary, I don't mean we'll ask you to do economics in the morning and politics in the afternoon. and in the late afternoon, some anthropology or sociology. What we are striving to do is that in every class, in every session, in every course, there is a multiple lens that you bring into understanding an issue or a problem. And among them, an important one is history, right? So even though there is no formally history in your course title, you will find that when you're interacting with your professors, they have a pretty good knowledge of history or the evolution of ideas. So in that sense, it's interdisciplinary. It's not that, we are not asking you to connect the dots by teaching you, 101 in economics and 101 in politics, and then, try and figure out and make sense of the world. Now, this is important because public policy is inherently interdisciplinary. You need to understand psychology, you need to understand economics, politics, culture. All of that comes into play to make sense of public policy. So you are in a rather unique institution that way, because many institutions will follow suit. In fact, there are now about 50 programs of public policy all over the country, and we take satisfaction. There is a saying that imitation is a very sincere form of flattery, and our course curriculum has been imitated in many other institutions, and that's all to the good. And we need many more schools of public policy in this country. Now, having said that, this is the 13th commencement lecture, and I dare say that the commencement speaker that we have in Sanjeev Sanyal is absolutely the right person. There couldn't be a better person than him, because he's a polymath. You cannot classify him as an economist or a historian or a policymaker. He's been all that. He is all that. But moreover, he has an extraordinary range of interests. And that is a role model and exemplar for all of you. That is, he's interested in ancient monuments, in the Archaeological Survey of India and what they do, right? He's interested in what kind of ships did India have when it had very strong connections to Indonesia, to the Middle East in ancient times. What kind of vessels did they manufacture and make? My wife is from Bali, Indonesia. There is a Bali Jatra that the people in Orissa would know, that remembers this connection, the maritime connection that India has had. Now, he's initiated a project where there are people actually building a vessel on the same lines in which, from whatever available evidence, whether it be the a fresco in the Ajanta caves or some other texts, figuring out how a vessel was built. I mean, the Norwegians did it with a ship called Kon-Tiki. Now, we are doing this. He's doing it. It's his brainchild. Now, that's extraordinary, to be able to write a history of the influence of the Indian Ocean on history, in relations between countries, is extraordinary. And then to celebrate the lives of 75 Indians who are not all that well known, to mark the 75th year of the Republic, is again extraordinary. I mean, so this is the kind of range of things that Sanjeev Sanyal takes an interest in, and not just a dilettantish interest, but a very serious and scholarly interest. So sometimes I wonder, and then he works with a good friend of mine called Bibek Debroy, and I wonder where on earth do these people find the time to write what they do, because it takes us so much of our time to read what they've written, and to think that they've actually written the stuff, which means that every page that's written takes much longer than it takes to read that page, and it seems a very tall order even to get through all the books that they have published. And Sanjeev's got many books, fascinating subjects. So in a way, his personality and his scholarship encapsulates the kind of person that we should aspire to be. which is, there's a famous essay that Isaiah Berlin wrote called on Tolstoy, called The Hedgehog and the Fox, where it's based on a Greek fable where the hedgehog knows one big thing, right? And that is to curl itself up and put out its spikes to protect itself. And the fox is cunning and knows many little things. And so you classify people, are they a hedgehog, or is Tolstoy actually a hedgehog wanting to, appearing to be a fox or whatever. But in effect, we can't have this distinction. You have to have serious and substantive range and a good grasp of multiple disciplines, multiple fields, multiple interests, and you must also have some depth in one or two of them, so that you can push the frontiers of knowledge through your experience, not necessarily as an academic. The Vice Chancellor often laments that young people, when asked how many of you are going to become teachers, hardly any hands go up. And that's a worrying thing, because some of you must become teachers, particularly if you're very good. For future generations, good teachers are vitally needed. So that's another opportunity. So you may wish to think of academics as a career, but there's a whole wide world open to you. And so I welcome you to this very exciting university and this exciting school. We've got top faculty. And one of the reasons why Sanjeev Sanyal is appropriate is because when Naresh Singh joined as the executive dean of the school, he brought with him the idea of complexity economics, which very few people had thought about, and you'll learn more about it from the commencement lecture. And not just that, but he also calls it the center, complexity economics, applied spirituality. Now that's another part of, in the entire economics development literature, the fact that human beings need some degree of spiritual understanding of what is the meaning of life is missing. It's all seen in terms of goods and services that you can consume, production, growth, and so on. But it's not about that dimension, which is very vital for people. And so, linking that with complexity economics, again, a new field, and public policy is a unique and extraordinary venture. And I would invite some of you to take a serious interest in that center and go and meet Professor Naresh Singh and get inspired by him to continue to work in that field. Not all of you may wish to do that, but it's enough that there's a critical mass that does that to keep such a center pushing the frontiers of knowledge in the school and contributing to the standing and reputation of the university. So with those words, I welcome you all again.
So good afternoon, friends. So let me start by thanking the Vice Chancellor and the Dean for inviting me to speak here today. I had no idea that there were fellow Rhodes Scholars, but I found that out literally on the stage. So thank you very much, and thank you also to the faculty and the students for tolerating me for the next hour or so. The topic I've chosen may sound a little esoteric. It's about rethinking and revisioning economics as a complex adaptive system. And as you will see, it is a completely different way of thinking about economics. Bits and pieces of this already exist in the field of economics, but some of it may be new. But I thought, rather than give a more conventional speech about economics, I do these kinds of lectures quite often in universities, but this is a special opportunity to me to speak about one of my favorite subjects, which is complexity theory. And there are very, very, very few institutions where I can do it. This happens to be one of them because you actually have a department looking at this. So hence, I'm particularly pleased to do this. Now, since most of you here are on your very first day at university, and I'm assuming this is the class that's studying economics, Very quickly, if you haven't already, you will be presented with a chart of this kind. You see, many people don't realize that all fields, including social sciences, are ultimately based on a certain frame. So economics too, like all areas of knowledge, is based on a frame. It's not based on absolute ideas. And the frame on which most economics, conventional economics is based is ironically Newtonian mechanics. That's because much of what is today economics developed in the late 19th and early 20th century. And what was the dominant technology of that time? It was the steam engine. And so you have terms throughout economics which are basically Newtonian terms. You will very often hear about the term equilibrium. You will hear the term inertia or momentum or levers of fiscal and monetary policy, or the term liquidity. Now, there is some use to using these terms, I don't deny, but you can clearly see what is the frame of reference of this entire line of thinking. And the sort of culmination, sort of the simplest way to present it is this chart which some of you will come across, which has basically shows the price on one side and quantity on the other, and you have a downward sloping demand curve, an upward sloping supply curve, and you will be told that there is an equilibrium clearing, market clearing price, which is essentially where you want to be because it's all very optimal at that level. And essentially from here on, the rest of economics really starts off. So if you study, even if you studied economics in 11, 12, I'm sure you have come across this. And of course, then the ideas that come through from it are ideas like general equilibrium, i.e. this doesn't just happen here. There are always these interconnected markets where all of this is happening. There is, everybody is rational. There's ceteris paribus, i.e. If you change something in one bit, you can assume that the rest of the system doesn't change along with it. There's diminishing marginal utility. There's natural rate of interest or unemployment. All of these terms you will very quickly hear about. The problem is that almost all of this is fiction. Not even the greatest company in the world, say Apple, many of you have Apple phones. If you ask Apple, the company, to draw the demand curve and the supply curve of its most popular iPhone, it won't be able to do it. Now, if the biggest company in the world producing one of the most popular products in the world cannot do this, how do people in any other product do this? And even if they did it for one point in time, in the very next instant, the whole game changes again. And so basically what you end up with is that the entire basis of economics is essentially a religious belief. It's a bit like believing in whatever is your favorite deity. And so you have here neoliberals who are more based, they'll think about economics in purely in terms of getting the markets right, and markets are going to take you to this optimal equilibrium. And you have, of course, the other school, which is usually the socialists, who think that, the government needs to do everything. But let me point out that in both cases, they're essentially sects of the same religion. Because both of them are essentially based on the idea that there is such a thing as an optimal equilibrium, even if nobody has ever seen one. And then main difference is really about how to reach this optimal equilibrium. The neoliberals think the markets will get you there. The socialists think that wise old men in planning commission will get you there. But they both believe in the God of optimal equilibrium. But look at the real world we live in. Okay? Just this morning, the financial markets of Japan, the stock market in Japan, dropped 12%. Did anything particular happen overnight? Could anybody yesterday have told you what was going to happen? Was that, given the information we had yesterday, was that optimal? What changed in the following 12 hours from the market shutting down yesterday to the morning opening today that changed 12% in the price. And by the way, many of those stocks are actually, are at some sort of a market shutdown, switch off. So when things open tomorrow, they may fall again tomorrow. So the point I'm making to you is that clearly we do not live in a world which has any tendency to go towards this optimal equilibrium. And neither bureaucrats nor the market knows where this equilibrium is, or if this equilibrium exists at all. Now it turns out that I am not the first person who has became a little suspicious about this whole thing. Friedrich von Hayek, who is one of the greatest economists of the 20th century, in his Nobel Lecture Prize in December 1974, essentially said the same thing. The lecture, interestingly, is called The Pretense of Knowledge. Basically, he's mocking other economists for pretending they know what's going on. And he says, if man is not to do more harm than the good in his efforts to improve the social order, he will have to learn that this is, as in all other fields where essential complexity of any organized kind prevails, he cannot acquire the full knowledge which will make the mastery of the events possible. He will therefore have to use what knowledge he can achieve, not to shape the results as a craftsman shapes his handiwork, but rather to cultivate a growth by providing the appropriate environment in which the gardener does this for his plants. As a policymaker, the best you can really do is sort of get it right in a rough sort of way, and then keep adjusting along the way, because the weather may change, it may rain too much, you may get pests, etc., and continuously adjust along the way. And you can see what he's really describing is a complex adaptive system. In fact, he too uses the word complexity. Now, complexity theory is really a derived subpart of something called chaos theory. Some of you may be already aware of this area of knowledge, especially if you come from a sciences background. And what happens in a complex adaptive system is the following. A complex adaptive system is one where there's a large number of heterogeneous agents which are interacting with them. So these heterogeneous agents could be consumers, they could be the government, they could be producers, they could be politicians, nature, all kinds of things. They're all interacting with each other. And they're doing so in non-linear ways and in unpredictable ways. Yeah? Who knew yesterday that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh was going to resign this morning? Nobody knew this, even she didn't know this. And resulting in emergent and evolving self-organization. Now, this is an important part. Just because all of this looks like there are all kinds of random stuff going on, does not mean that there isn't any underlying order in all of this. And so, this kind of system exists everywhere you look. In fact, this is the world we live in. This is not the Newtonian world we live in. So what are these? Cities are complex adaptive systems. Weather systems are complex adaptive systems. Financial markets are complex adaptive systems. The English language is a complex adaptive system. The economic systems, ecological systems, these are all complex adaptive systems. Each one of them, for example, the English language, in that the heterogeneous agents as grammar, there are words, there are common usages, then there are new things that are happening in unpredictable ways. Who knew how social media was going to change the language? You couldn't predict this, but it has. I mean, when I was growing up, the LOL would have meant literally nothing. But all of you know what it means, right? So these are all systems, but there is certain pattern. If there wasn't some logic to English language, you and I wouldn't be able to communicate at all. So they are not random. So now I'm going to show you how these complex adaptive systems, examples of them. But before I get there, let me tell you some of the characteristics of what a complex adaptive system is. Don't have to learn these things by heart, but it'll give you some sense of it. First of all, these systems are not a sum of their parts. Okay? So for example, you take an ecological system. An ecological system is not just about the sum of the trees, the bees, the deer, and the tiger. There are all kinds of other things going on in an ecological system. The English language is not just about learning the grammar and the words or even the common usages. It's all evolving in all kinds of ways. But the interaction itself creates these emergent self-organization. So this is an important thing. There is a certain pattern in all of this. These systems are non-deterministic. What does that mean? There is no particular direction in which these things are going. There are, at any point in time, they can go in multiple paths. Okay? So they're non-deterministic. One of the implications of this, for those of you who want to become economists, don't waste a large amount of time on forecasting. But they are path dependent, which is once you go down a particular path, you're stuck with it. And this is true for all kinds of things. For example, ecological systems. Yeah? Once the dinosaurs died out and only the birds remained, it's very difficult to re-evolve a Tyrannosaurus rex. The space of the carnivore is still there, but something completely different, i.e., the tiger and the lion turned up, right? So they are path dependent. Then, the systems have feedback loops. This is very important. There are all kinds of feedbacks come back, and there's capacity for adaptation. The agents who are dealing there are not stuck agents. They are taking feedback and adapting continuously with each other, as a result of which their interactions are also evolving over time. There is a huge amount of nonlinearity, and there are butterfly effects. There's a very famous example, which those of you familiar with chaos theory will go, that the fluttering of a butterfly in the Amazon influences a great hurricane in North America. The point being made is, in a complex system, a very small change can have a big impact, and a very big impact can have a very small influence. So there is a huge amount of nonlinearity in it. And of course, as a result of all of this, if you're a policymaker or an investor or whatever, certainly as a policymaker, got to be very, very difficult, very careful about what on earth you do, because you suffer severely from unintended consequences. I may be thinking I'm improving something here, but in fact, I will end up blowing up the whole system somewhere else. So these are the characteristics of it. So let me show you what a complex adaptive system actually looks like. This is a murmuration of birds. Some of you may have already seen it. Now look at this. This is the result of a large number of birds interacting with each other. There is no pattern. There is a pattern, but there is no leader. Okay? It's not like any one of those birds there knows exactly how this is going on. But at the same time, the end result of it is not random. There is a certain system to it. So look at it. Now, birds do this, fish shoals do this, many other things do it. But this kind of thing is something many of you may have seen. You probably, it's a common enough phenomena, by the way, in North India. So they may even happen in and around this campus, I don't know. But this is an example of a complex adaptive system. Now, what is going on here? Large number of birds have come in the murmuration. The birds are spread out, they come together. The flock splits apart, fuses together, and creates these beautiful patterns. They constantly change directions, they go up and down. But notice a few things. There is no leader. No bird knows how this is going on. There is no plan. So how are they doing this? It turns out that individual birds are actually following some simple rules. And a lot of scientists have studied this phenomena, and they say, basically what they're doing is that individual birds are following some simple rules vis-a-vis distance from their neighbors. Each bird keeps track of about their 7 closest neighbors and adjusts. They focus on a few factors, the attraction zone, repulsion zone, angular alignment, and so on. But there are very few rules they are following. And as a result of that, simple rules, they end up creating this beautiful patterns. And this happens with fish, insects, and all kinds of other things. Similar thing happens with weather systems. Here is an example. Lots of things are interacting with each other, different kinds of pressure zones. There's the ocean, there's the land mass there. Again, you cannot ex ante, no matter how good your predicting model is, you cannot ex ante predict that next year on so and so day, will there or will there not be a hurricane? There could be, there could not be. Certain times of the year, the conditions are more conducive to having hurricanes. This is not random, because clearly certain kinds of hurricanes don't happen at other times of the year or at any old place in the ocean. There are certain parts of the ocean where it happens more often, and yet you can't quite predict the whole thing. So there is a level of organization, there is a little bit of predictability, but on the other hand, enough randomness or unpredictability in all of this. So, what is the organizing principle that creates this internal pattern that you are seeing? Those, in the science language, are called strange attractors. These are the things around which these things are swirling. They are the rules around which these things are. They are organizing principles. So in a language, for example, they can be the rules of grammar, can be common usage. In a city, it could be the road grid, the building codes, the socio-economic activity that happens. Maybe there are some legacy or heritage buildings, etc. in there. So those could be the organizing principle. In a weather system, it could be atmospheric pressure, geographical features. In financial markets, it could be the existence of a secondary market platform like a stock market, the regulator, the principles of the limited liability or joint stock company. These are all the combination of things that create the strange attractors of any system. Importantly, and why it is different completely from the laws of Newton, is that these strange attractors are not permanent laws. This is a very important thing you need to understand. They are evolving set of conditions, like an eddy in a stream. Sometimes quite ephemeral. They may appear and disappear. Notice that this is a very, very different conception of an organizing principle than an optimal equilibrium. Yeah? Now, if this is the world in which we live, which is so seemingly unpredictable, all kinds of things are happening, how on earth do human beings make their way through the system? It's almost impossible, right? And yet we are able, most people will make through life. Maybe they'll not get their perfect life, but they will make it through. How do they make it through their life? And so there was another Nobel laureate economist, Herbert Simon, who says that in fact, human beings are not rationally optimizing because it's simply not possible to optimize. There's so many things going around you. No human being, not even artificial intelligence when it's got to the perfect way, can do this because there is no optimal equilibrium to aspire for. It's not about better calculation. It's not about better knowledge. So the best way human beings deal with this is doing something he called satisficing. Satisficing basically means you make do with something that is sort of satisfactory. You're not trying to optimize because it's too difficult. In any case, there's nothing to optimize. And how do human beings optimize? Well, they use something called heuristics. Don't get put off by the term. It basically means it's a rule of thumb that you use to make your way. And how do humans turn up to these rules of thumb? Well, there are many ways. I'm going to just talk about three. One is feedback loops. Other is intellectual frameworks or narratives, which, by the way, includes ideologies. It could be a religious belief. It could be spirituality, because I think since we have a complex school here, it's about spirituality. And it could be the socioeconomic context. Context drives your behavior, and it happens all the time. The same person behaves completely different in two different places. I can tell you that myself. I lived for many years in Singapore, and of course I'm from Delhi. I drive in both countries, but I drive completely differently in both these places. In Singapore, I'm very well, I'll follow all the rules to the T. In Delhi, well, I'm a Delhiwala. Now, This feedback loop point is not a very difficult one. Economists seem to be the last people on this planet who seem to have come to this. But basically, it's a simple idea. When you leave, you find yourself in a dark room. How do you make your way forward? You basically feel your way through the darkness. So that is basically it. You enter most human beings will basically iterate their way forward into life. It's a perfectly reasonable and sensible way of making your way through life. If you aren't optimizing or making a grand plan about how to lead your lives in your first day, in your first year in college, don't worry. Making it all up is the way to do it. Most people are doing it. We just have a great name for it. It's called feedback loops. The software engineers now call it agile systems. So basically, you create a software which is sort of works. You introduce it, and you make feedback loops and improve it. This is not such a crazy idea, because frankly, it is impossible to tell all the myriad things that would go wrong. So it's better to try and fix it along the way as you go. But then, of course, you have to be careful that you have to create all kinds of buffers in the system, because you don't want to get blown up along the way. So this is the kind of principle that is used for many other things. For example, the introduction of the GST. Many of you are old enough to remember 2017, we introduced the GST. Now, introducing the GST was a very, very big deal, because before GST, the whole country had, every state, in fact, even cities had their own tax systems. And it was every state border, there would be lots of trucks standing there, lots of money passing hands, and there was complete chaos because a company wouldn't know how much it'd get taxed in different states. We weren't even a common market. But this was not some new discovery. Even when I was at university, the fact that we needed a unified GST was being debated. And we kept debating it and debating it and debating it. So why didn't we introduce them when every economist and every government thought it was a good idea? The reason for it is everybody was under the impression that you had to create the perfect system and introduce it. And of course, it's impossible for a country our size with tens of thousands, with lakhs of products, with all kinds of linkages with all of these things, inputs and outputs, etc. So the only way you were going to introduce the GST, I'm afraid, was to broadly get it right, introduce it, and fix it. Now, that's what we did. So many people think that we introduced the GST and then discovered all those errors. No. We knew it wouldn't work in the beginning. It's only afterwards we fixed it along the way. Now it sort of works. It's never going to be perfect. Even when you are standing here in 30 years odd from now, you will still be trying to fix it, because it's a complex adaptive system. There's no end point. It keeps evolving. Similar thing in solvency and bankruptcy. If you call entrepreneurship risk-taking activity, then it means they're taking risk, which means, of course, that some part of it will naturally go wrong. Ex ante, we have no idea which one will go wrong. It's only afterwards you find out. After all, every entrepreneur takes the risk because they think they can make it, otherwise they wouldn't be trying, right? But some proportion of businesses will go wrong. That's part of the model. So therefore, we shouldn't get so emotional about the fact that companies blow up all the time. That is the model. It's called creative destruction. And the key policy framework for that is the insolvency and bankruptcy code, which was also interestingly introduced only relatively recently in 2016 to allow that creative destruction process to happen as a natural part of how the economy functions. Before that, we had a very convoluted system in which we tried to keep alive these zombie companies in something called the Bureau of Industrial Financial Reconstruction or something like that, BIFR. Now, all of this may be very obvious, but traditional economic models usually do not allow for this iterative process, because they already assume that there is this equilibrium to assume to. It's now a matter of how to get to it as fast as possible. And the markets will get you there. This is the inspiration between, the Big Bang reforms, say, Russia went through when it came out of communism. And of course, For many years, it led to absolute chaos. Market does not naturally move to any optimal equilibrium because there isn't one to move to, any more than the bureaucrats in the Planning Commission know where that equilibrium is. Now, I told you, one way to make your way through the darkness is through iteration. The other is by using some framework of thinking. Now, one of those frameworks of thinking is actually narratives. It is extraordinary the extent to which human beings are influenced by certain narratives which allow them to make sense of this rather senseless world we live in. Those narratives could be ideologies, it could be a political narrative, it could be religious texts or spirituality, it could be many, many things. And there is, in fact, another very famous economist, because economists are finally waking up that these things matter, which you may read, a book by Robert Shiller called Narrative Economics. Maybe it's in your library. And the book, by the way, is published only in 2019. So, you can tell how slow economists are in getting things. And so he says that, and he gives various examples of how the way people think is derived by the narratives that they believe in. In India, for example, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata have an enormous influence in the way we think about and make sense of the world. And we have survived as a civilization for 5,000 years with that framework. So it's not obviously a bad framework. Other societies may use other ways of doing so. So one of the things is that when faced, and his book says, when in a doubt how to behave in an ambiguous situation, people look back to narratives and adopt a role that they have heard of. And this because when in doubt, imitate. This is an important heuristic or rule of thumb. And very frankly, this is a rational thing to do. Because most rational behavior is possible in practicality, but traditional economic theory does not model for reasonable behavior. It expects you to be rational, and it expects you to be rational based on complete knowledge. And as I pointed out to you, both of them are utterly impossible to come by. One of the results of living in a world where narratives matter, however, is that you have to deal with something called the Overton window. How many are familiar with the idea of Overton window? Okay, few of you are. So the Overton window is a very interesting concept. It basically says that a policymaker or a politician or whoever is a leader of an organization of a large numbers of people, say the Prime Minister or somebody in a position of power can take any decision, can only take a decision that is within the narrative that the people, his followers, believe in. So if there is a certain narrative box that the population accepts, you cannot simply begin to do something which is outside of that box, even if it is the sensible thing to do, because the rest of the population will simply not follow you there. You have to, if you want to actually go somewhere which is well out of the box, you have to invest a fair amount of effort, and can take you years, if not decades, to shift people to that other narrative, even if it is completely sensible. Which is why sometimes, but once the narrative shifts, you will be quite surprised the extent to which people will accept a certain way of thinking of things, even if just a few years earlier they thought that was completely absurd. This whole debate, for example, that you now have with who is a woman, but not so much in India, but in the West. Now, this would have been considered an unthinkable debate even a decade ago. Who is a woman would be considered a scientific fact, not a sociological opinion. And yet, we now have the Olympics being fought boxing matches in the Olympics being done based on this new framework. Now, I'm not here to debate which one is right or wrong. I'm just pointing out to you the extent to which the narrative framework impacts the way people behave. Now, close cousin of this is the idea of the context. Because I cannot make out what is the right decision to do, I simply will end up responding to the context I happen to be. Okay? So, you will see this phenomena across India. The cities may be very dirty, but the same people, when they go inside the metro system, they are very happy to keep it clean. Or when they come inside your university campus, they will be meticulously keeping their room clean, etc. The same person will drive out and then throw a soda can out of the window. Why are they doing this? Because human beings, another way they make decisions is through the context in which they are. So there's a very famous experiment that was done in Stanford in the 1973 in the psychology department, which really showed how human beings respond to context. So what they did is, they took, the professors who were doing the experiment took the class and they divided them utterly randomly into two groups. One of them were designated as prisoners and the others were made the prison guards. Okay? Now remember, these guys are classmates. They're mostly friends, girlfriends, boyfriends. They're probably in the same football team, whatever it is. They are randomly being distributed, one group being made guards, the others being made prisoners. And then they lock them into a experimental facility for a little bit of time. Now it's quite incredible what happened over the next few hours. In not too much time, the guards began to boss over their prisoners. In fact, very quickly they began to do what in India would be called ragging. And then it developed into some things which became increasingly more violent. Okay? And it became so bad after a while that in a couple of days later, they actually had to shut down the experiment before somebody got badly hurt. Here is the kinds of things that some of the prisoners were being made to do. They were made to do all kinds of corporal punishments. They were being checked, harassed, etc. And here's the original video. It's in black and white. That's from 1973. But you can hear from the voiceover and even from the hazy things, you can basically see what was going on.
Because the first day passed without incident, we were surprised and totally unprepared for the rebellion which broke out on the morning of the second day. When waking the prisoners for the 10 o'clock count, the morning guard shift found that the prisoners in cell number 1 had removed their stocking caps, ripped off their numbers, and barricaded themselves inside the cells by putting their beds against the door. The prisoners began to taunt and curse the guards to their face. This, of course, embarrassed and upset the guards. The morning shift immediately called in reinforcements. They asked the night shift to stay on, and they called up 3 other standby guards to help put down the rebellion.
So you can see what's happening here. These are classmates. Nobody has any real power over anyone else. Yeah? Everybody knows it's completely make-believe. And yet, by the second day, they were in a situation where somebody was going to get badly hurt. Yeah? Why? Because these people, classmates as they may have been, had been put into a prison context. So very quickly, they began to behave like prison guards and prisoners. And one group began to harass the others began to taunt them back, and they basically, it was spiraling out of control. Another experiment, also from the 1970s, is called the broken window experiment. Many of you may have heard of this term, broken window, at some place. But again, this was done in New York at about the same time, in fact. And you have to know what is going on in 1970s, late 60s, 1970s New York. These cities are going through massive industrialization. There's white flight. large areas of New York have basically gone derelict and abandoned. There's deindustrialization. The huge numbers of, Detroit and all these entire cities were being abandoned as people moved into the suburbs. So what happened is that there was a huge spike in crimes in places like Harlem and all. Before this happened, Harlem was actually a rather well-ordered, working-class neighborhood. All of a sudden, it became a rather dangerous kind of place, and all of this kind of thing was happening. So a group of professors decided to do this experiment. So they went into a very derelict neighborhood where everybody had left, and and somebody had come, they smashed the windows, some of the houses had been burnt, etc. and so forth. And so there were these two parallel roads right next to each other, which were very derelict. So what they did was, in one of the lanes, they painted them very nicely, made the hedges of the correct, put some lights in there, put some curtains, etc. Gave it a sort of ordered feel to one of the roads. In the other road, they only fixed the windows, okay? That was still messy with graffiti and everything, but they fixed the windows. And then they went away for a few weeks. When they came back a few weeks later, they found something very, very interesting. The lane in which they had fixed everything was still perfectly fine. The lane in which they had only fixed the windows but they had not spruced it up, interestingly, all the windows had been broken by the neighborhood kids. Again, context matters. If you create a sense of orderliness, you will get order. People, even the same neighborhood kids who presumably walked down both the lanes, behaved better in one of the lanes than in the other. And again, both of these cases are very well documented. There are papers on them, etc., so you can read up about them. So I'm just telling you all of this because this now comes to how we have to rethink economics completely. I know I'm messing up the lives of some of your economics faculty, but you see what it does mean is that human beings do not behave rationally. The entire field of behavioral economics has evolved on the basis of saying, oh, look, human beings violate rationality. Hello, yes. Because life is not about putting your hand into some bag and pulling out a white ball or a black ball. Life is much more complicated. And it is rational in that environment to essentially adapt along the way. And there's an entire field of economics and things relating to adaptive expectations, but there are many other areas of economics. So it's not that economics doesn't know that these exist. For some reason that these areas of economics, whether it's satisficing or adaptation, etc., or Hayek for that matter, right in the beginning, they are for some reason not the default that is taught. I will give you another example of an area of economics that has developed entire fields of work based on the problems that I talked about in a complex system. This is the work of incomplete contracts by Oliver Hart. Oliver Hart got the Nobel Prize in 2016. And what is his contribution? It's actually, again, a very simple idea. He basically made the point that a contract, which has basically rights, obligations, etc., cannot be defined for every future state of the world. Because all future states of the world are unknown. So there can never be any perfect contract. This is not just a contract between two individuals or two companies. This is also, by the way, our contract with the state. In other words, there is no such thing as a perfect law. All laws are an approximation, and it is too expensive and complicated to write a complete contract. So by definition, every contract, law, or policy is an approximation. It's incomplete. And this again has a very profound implications about how we think about laws and contracts and enforcement. And unfortunately, again, we don't teach this very basic thing in a meaningful manner, nor in fact, because we don't teach it, since this is a public policy school, let me say, this does not come into your public policy thinking. The result of that is we end up with public policies which are way too prescriptive and complicated. How have we ended up with these complicated prescriptive policies? Because somewhere along the way, people forgot this and they tried to solve every possible outcome. But in fact, it's a ridiculous thing to do because it's not possible to do it. And with every single complication that I try to introduce in order to fix some corner problem, remember the problem of unintended consequences? I create even further unintended ripples, which further have to be fixed, and so on and so forth. This is a game you cannot win. And that is the implication of this area of study. So, implications of complexity-based thinking on economics. First of all, there is no definite optimal equilibrium, whether it is decided by the government or by or predicted by the market. We are evolving all the time. This does not mean, however, as I pointed out with the murmuration of birds, that there aren't certain patterns. There isn't a certain emergent order to this. It just isn't predetermined and definite. Unfortunately, way too much time is spent on trying to forecast and make detailed plans. So we used to try out this thing called 5-year plans in the Planning Commission. You will remember. We did it for about 45 years and discovered it's a disaster. The financial markets equivalent, or the markets equivalent of that, is forecasting. Just because you've got a 2,000 line Excel sheet doesn't mean that your forecasts are going to be any better than tossing a coin. Too much effort goes into these detailed plans and forecasts. I am making one forecast, however, about the people in this room. Please have respect for the guy in your class who has no plans about life at all. He's the most likely guy to succeed. I cannot tell you how he will succeed, but because he has not tied himself in an uncertain world to either a plan or to a forecast, he's the most likeliest guy. Because remember, if you had gone back to the Harvard classes that Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates happened to be in their class, you would have said, this is crazy, he's in Harvard and he's decided to drop out in his first year. This has got to be the biggest loser if you went by the predictive model, but of course they weren't. So in a foggy, evolving, unpredictable world, needs to be dealt with in a very different way. What does it mean? First of all, simple, general, and flexible policies will always beat prescriptive and comprehensive policies. Now this may seem very obvious after this long lecture on complexity. Unfortunately, you will be shocked that this comes as absolutely out of the blue to most policymakers, because they have the exact opposite view. Because basically, if, for example, I tell somebody, Singapore has a very simple tax system, and India should aspire to have a simple tax system like Singapore. That immediately somebody will stand up and say, no, India is such a large and complex country, therefore, and Singapore is such a small, simple country, therefore we should have a bigger and more complicated tax system and not try to emulate Singapore. But in fact, if you take a complexity theory view of the world, it should be exactly the opposite. The more complicated the system, the fewer the rules it can follow, because it is too complicated. So in fact, India's tax system should be even simpler than Singapore's. In fact, in an infinitely complex world, you can only follow one rule. Now this is a point, by the way, I'm trying to introduce into the discourse, and In the economic survey of 21-22, we inserted some of this thinking in there. I'll quoting from there. The problems of India's administrative processes derive less from lack of compliance to rules and regulatory standards, but from over-regulation. The problem of over-regulation stems from not recognizing the inevitability of incomplete contracts and regulations in a world of uncertainty. So, my little effort to insert this kind of thinking into the conversation in our policy-making world. Basically, what I'm arguing for is that what you need is that you need to introduce simple, flexible rules, look at actual outcomes, not predictive outcomes, but actual outcomes, fix the system flexibly along the way through iteration, i.e. feedback loops. That will always outperform some genius who came up with an upfront great idea. Similarly, some more evidence. Now, in a country like India, or in any country for that matter, because you live in this complex world, as I said, it means that things will go wrong all the time. And by the way, things can go really badly wrong. Like, for example, you can suddenly get struck by a COVID pandemic. Who would know that? In this kind of environment, it is very, very important that you have a very good legal system. So, those of you who follow me on my podcasts and so on will be aware that I keep making the point that the single most important reforms that India needs to do is to fix the legal system. Before anything else, we should fix the legal system, and secondly, fix the administrative system. Why do I say this all the time? Because you see, if contracts cannot be complete, in other words, there is always going to be scope for some dispute. Then what is going to happen? The only way you're going to be able to make your way forward is if you have a legal system that fixes and enforces the contract and is able to make your way through this darkness. So of all the various reforms we need to do, this is the reform, I would argue, is the single most important. Having 50 million cases stuck in our judicial system, in my view, is an absolute travesty. But there are many others like this. Similarly, for how do you make changes? How do you give direction? Why do you need leaders? For example, in economics, you will never hear about the importance of a leader. Why? Because the optimal equilibrium is obvious from some technocratic calculation, and in the worldview of Newtonian economics, bad politicians are not taking us to that optimal equilibrium. But in fact, there is no optimal equilibrium. Even worse, even if there was a very good policy that we all knew about, we can't get you there because people will not follow you because of the Overton window problem. And so it matters a great deal who the leader of a country is. A leader that is able to take decisions, sometimes unpopular decisions, and lead is a very important part of how a society evolves. And yet economics has absolutely nothing to matter. Similarly, it matters to have skin in the game. Why do you need skin in the game? Because ex ante, you cannot tell which policy advisor, which expert is actually telling you a good advice. So how do you ensure that you're getting good advice? But one way of doing that is that in order to ensure that the great economists, etc., are not giving you bullshit, is that they have some skin in the game. That's why I never believe in any economist whose children are not going to be taxpayers in this country. So I don't care how famous these NRI economists in America are. If their kids are not Indian citizens and likely to pay taxes here, I simply ignore whatever they are saying. It's a very good filter. With that, let me say, in a complex, uncertain world where humans can at best navigate using rough heuristics, it is actually irrational to be rational. It is better to be merely reasonable and satisfied. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
I request the Dean to come and give the concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev Sanyal. This was terrific. It's the perfect start to our academic year and to our new students and others here. And thank you. We have just embarked in this new area. We have a long way to go. There are ingrained habits that we have to consciously shed among the faculty. One of the difficulties of running a public policy school is that we didn't have people with prior qualifications in public policy, so to speak. So people came as sociologists or anthropologists or economists and needed to then become interdisciplinary. And that took a while, and it is still work in progress. But your talk today has been extraordinarily stimulating and highly persuasive. And so I'm sure that, we'll leave Santa Fe long behind and make some progress in some very innovative ways of doing public policy. But in a way, it will boil down to common sense. And the common sense part of it is, there's a lot of regularity in human life. Most of us, go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning. There are some people who are night owls and don't do that. That's true too. But then there's an inherent element of being human is unpredictability. I mean, I can't say that, if I was completely deterministic, I'm a robot. But my essential, quintessential humanness lies in there being an element of unpredictability. And so that is to be taken as a given, as a starting point. And therefore, I think there's lots to be done and lot to, change. And so thank you for setting us off at the start of the academic year. And I wanted to, the final word, having said what I have on behalf of the university, must come from our registrar. Our registrar is, led a very important part of the postgraduate education in the law school. He's an international lawyer of repute, an office bearer in the Indian Society of International Law, and he has taken upon himself the administrative burden of keeping this university going, and we are all indebted to him because there's so much that happens in the back room that we just take for granted. And I would, before I leave this podium, thank the registrar on behalf of the school and the university for his services to this university. And you can have a word.
Thanks a lot, Sudarshan. We all live in an uncertain world, and we are navigating through these complex times on all occasions and at all times. But a lot has been said, and that made my job easier. But we are so grateful to you, Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal, because it's such a complex area, but you have unpacked it for the benefit of our students and faculty members in a very comprehensive manner. And I only just wanted to just say that this is what our newly admitted students who have joined the School of Government and Public Policy of this university, and even any other new student coming from other schools of the university can expect in terms of, like, it's a kind of a case study, the way the distinguished speaker this afternoon, dabbled with this particular topic while integrating and even bringing in conversations from other disciplines as well. So this is one of the advantageous ecosystem that you have here at this university, and it's a huge privilege for each one of us studying here and working here to be a part of this OP Jindal Global University. So I'm sure that all the students, the new cohorts as well as the existing students will benefit from the faculty expertise and the guidance from the faculty members and their mentorship, and also the support from all the administrative staff members. And there is a lot more which is going to unravel in the coming few days and weeks. And we only want you to immerse yourself thoroughly, because you're part of a system wherein you're taught public policy even from other disciplinary insights as well, which I'm sure it's going to make us better humans, right? Because when we are reading humanities, that sort of gives us a hope and belief that there's a lot more to do in terms of, actualizing our ideals. So I'm so glad that we are all together in this journey. And on this particular note, I welcome each one of you to the university. Be assured of our support, and I keep saying this to every new student: even be kind to yourself. When you're part of a new system, there are going to be new opportunities, new challenges, and new anxieties as well. But take one step at a time, and you will get the much needed support from all sort of domains. So congratulations for being a part of this university, and congratulations to the Dean and his faculty members for having set up this wonderful afternoon with a lecture delivered by Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal. And we're so grateful to you, Sanjeev ji, because it's a Monday and then you traveled all the way from Delhi to be here with us. Thank you so much.